Because while some say this is as good as it gets, we know the best is yet to come. Thank you very much.
The convention had two major goals. Number one was to review the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, who has been leader since September 10th, 2022. Leadership reviews like this are a chance for the people of the party to make their voices heard if the leader isn't doing well and they want to change, so that the party isn't potentially stuck with a bad or unpopular leader. In other words, it's democracy in action. And number two, to discuss and reevaluate the policies and platforms that the party is running on, and discussing which policies they could potentially adopt going forward. In this video, we're going to go over everything you need to know about the Conservative Convention in Calgary last week. What does it mean for the future of the party and the future of Canada? Let's get into it. This is the first Conservative Convention, more specifically the first Conservative Convention with the goal of reviewing the leadership of the party head since Stephen Harper's convention 21 years ago in 2005. Harper's convention was held in Montreal from March 17th to March 19th. Pierre Poilievre's convention, however, was held in Calgary, Alberta. Conventions like these, not just for the Conservatives but for all parties, are typically held in places where there is quite a bit of support to try and negate the chances of some kind of coup or some chance of the review failing. Stephen Harper won his convention by 84% back in 2005, and Pierre Poilievre won with 87% this time around. Stephen Harper would go on to become Prime Minister the following year in 2006 until his defeat in 2015. Since there have only been these two leadership reviews since the party united in 2003 under the Unite the Right movement, you could say that this is actually the highest any Conservative leader has performed in the history of the party, asterisk, in its modern form. But before the modern Conservative Party was the Progressive Conservative Party, and the leadership convention of Joe Clark, where he got 66% of the vote. But in leadership reviews like Pierre Poilievre, Stephen Harper's, or even like Bonnie Crombie's or Merritt Stiles in Ontario a few months ago, it is custom for a win to be classified not as above 50% of the vote, as you might expect, but actually 2/3 of the vote. And since Joe Clark was right on the edge of that, he had to resign. Pierre Poilievre's convention had approximately 2,650 delegates. 2,558 of them voted for or against Pierre. So it wasn't just a bunch of MPs or elites. These delegates were everyday people who volunteer for their local riding. On a basic level, how it works is every riding has a certain number of slots for delegates. These delegates are selected by and from the board of the Electoral District Association, or EDA, which is a board made up of volunteers that is in every riding. It sounds complicated, but in simple terms, it is selected by volunteers from volunteers in each riding. These are people like you or I that are involved in helping out the riding. These were the people who were voting not just for Pierre, but for the policies put forward, and were even putting forward these policies to begin discussion on them. At the convention, a number of policies were put forward by volunteers and regular people involved in their ridings to be put up to a vote. What might happen is that an MP or someone would come up to the podium and give an argument as for why this policy should be run on, why they should continue to go on this platform, and then maybe someone would come up and give an argument against it, against running on this policy, and then they would vote afterwards, and these votes would determine which policies the party would run on going forward. Now, a lot of people were disappointed to see some of the policies not make it through, but just because a policy was shot down doesn't make it a bad idea. In politics especially, there's a difference between what a party can kind of believe in and what a party can run on. In short, strategically, many parties will opt to run on things people talk about most. It's the reason why affordability has been the buzzword of every party for like the last 3 years, because this is just what will get people's attention. Of course, there are exceptions. People weren't talking about the carbon tax nearly as much until Pierre Poilievre brought it up a couple years ago. But afterwards, it became a huge issue due to the fact that it really impacted people's livelihoods, and the Liberals had to remove it because of it. Overall, delegates voted to keep many of the same policies regarding defunding the CBC, tighter immigration laws, as well as a castle or standing ground law that would allow people to use reasonable force to take down any home invader. You might remember that this law was initially put forward by Pierre Poilievre last year after a man was arrested for defending his family in Toronto. Now let's talk about the speech that Pierre Poilievre gave, his keynote address. This is one of his longest speeches he's ever given, and it's been widely regarded as being one of his most heartfelt and touching speeches. Personally, I thought it was a really good way to recap everything that he's done under his leadership, all of the major issues they focus on, as well as the future of the party. Pierre Poilievre opened up a little bit and talked about his family, his children, and he shared real stories of real people who have been negatively impacted by soft liberal laws. One of these stories is of a woman who lost her aunt to a violent offender who should have been in prison but was out on bail. And another was the story of a man who overcame his addiction after surviving a suicide attempt through the power of faith and hard work. And he shared not just these stories, but how they're actually helping to fight these issues in the present day. So what does this mean for the party and for Canada as a whole? Well, like I said, the party didn't appear to adopt too many new policy platforms from the convention, but rather the convention seemed to reaffirm that the ones that they had been running on for the last 3 years are still as popular as ever, with some of these policies getting over 90% of the vote to stay on as a platform. This makes sense given Carney's underwhelming performance as Prime Minister in the year he's been in office. Now, a lot of these issues have seldom been addressed, if at all. If you learned something new in this video, please subscribe. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Have a great day.